Welcome into the episode of Patrick Jones Baseball. This week on the podcast, we are doing a little bit of a roundtable discussion. So we have two guests on the podcast, one reoccurring guest now, and then we have a new guest who he's not really new. He's very well known in the game. So we have Doug Latta, who is a private hitting instructor out in California. He's worked with some of the biggest names in baseball. If I started naming off all the MLB superstars he's worked with, you'd know them all. And he's been around a long time. I've known Doug. I really like the stuff that he preaches. I like the fact that he's not someone who's just out trying to make as many dollars as possible. He really is trying to do a lot of good in the game. And then we have Dr. Ismael Gallo, this is going to be his second time, I believe, on the podcast, second or third time. And he is a licensed physical therapist. He has an incredible app that I love for young kids, just to teach them how to move and to be able to do that in a simple way. So we're going to put his app in the show notes. And I like the app a lot. Obviously, he didn't tell me to promote the app or anything, but I just think it's great to be able to teach kids how to move starting at a young age. Anybody can do it, but I just think it's so incredibly important to start doing this at a young age. So put the link to that in the show notes. And in this discussion, we discuss everything movement. We're talking about movement quality. We're talking about how to move better, how to get hitters to move better. What are the things you can do? What are the things that Doug sees? We talk about how throwing and hitting are the same. And if you want to teach someone how to hit better and move better in the batter's box, you also need to teach them how to throw better. Here's my episode with Dr. Ismael Gallo and Doug Latta. All right, we now welcome onto the podcast Dr. Ismael Gallo and Doug Latta. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, man.
So, Doug, I want to first start off with you, and then Dr. Gallo, maybe you can follow up on this too. I know, Doug, you've talked a lot about how movement patterns are the foundation for everything an athlete becomes long-term. How early do you think those patterns actually start determining a player's ceiling, and what are the biggest mistakes you see from players at that age?
Well, the tough thing to do is figure at what point we start imprinting, our own anatomy, how we move, starts at a really young age. And I know Ismael is going to talk a little bit about global movement patterns. So at a certain point, very early, we're going to wind up kind of getting a body that moves a certain way or doesn't move a certain way, whatever the case may be. And some of that can be modified, of course. So it's a tough question because when you take a bunch of 4, 5, 6, 8-year-olds playing baseball, you want them to have fun. You want them to learn to enjoy the game. And you do kind of want to project a little bit. And the longer I've been at this, I realized there are a lot of things that, from a point of movement patterns, that become imprinted really early. And my job is typically doing my best to remove them, or at least create a new movement pattern that is closer to the efficiency we're going to need. So in a certain way, that sounds rather like over the top, getting a bunch of 5-year-olds to move differently. But I think a lot of it comes down to, I don't think the younger generations are actually moving a lot, doing athletic things, climbing. When's the last time you went to a park and saw it full of kids playing on swings, jungle gyms, things like that? And I've got to believe that plays into the role we see, whether everybody worries about, the inevitable falling down, the bruises, the cuts, the injuries, but they're so relatively small that we don't see the human body moving the way that it used to do. It doesn't push itself past limits. Did you ever play on the monkey bars?
I don't think maybe I did.
You hang and you just keep going.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
All right. What happened when you couldn't finish the whole route? Did you quit or did you keep trying and then got acceleration when you're able to actually do it, when you're able to get your body to make that move, right? I think that might be missing as a basic precept, a basic foundation of what we see in developing coordination and athleticism. Now, not everybody has these great athletic attributes, but I don't know that our human bodies get pushed continually from the standpoint of how each child is put into a program where they're actually moving. Okay, that being said, let's go back to baseball. There's lots of pieces to baseball, and we love it. Kids want to play catch. They want to do all these things. Dads want that to happen. Moms want that to happen. But at a certain point, if they fall in love with baseball, they want to succeed at it. And unfortunately, I think particularly as we get into what I call the pre-high school year, which is now the critical mass, I'd say between 12 and 15 are critical areas that we want to look at getting bodies to move better, and get the player more body aware. And that's going to grow over time because obviously they're not going to have man strength. They're not going to have old man strength. They're going to be developing. And if they don't have that now, the way the game is being played and the changes, they're going to be behind, or they're not going to be able to perform well enough to make a high school team and to be able to start that journey up into baseball. So I think movements are, and I think Ismael will agree, are 100% the key to any athletic endeavor. What was the sport you first played when you were a child?
Basketball.
All right. So did they hand you a basketball and say start dribbling and start shooting and doing things like that?
Yeah.
All right. Did you dribble right-handed or left-handed?
Right-handed.
All right. When did you learn to dribble left-handed?
When we had to do left-handed layup lines.
Uh-huh. All right. So what you look at is suddenly now I see that as kind of an asymmetrical development. Not that you're going to be left-handed or right-handed if you're opposite, but your body starts developing asymmetrically. And Dr. Gallo, Ismael, jump in whenever you feel like it. But that begins the effort that development is going to be kind of one-sided. There's going to be a little bit of a balance issue. Now, we're never going to be dominant on both sides of our body. We're going to prefer right or left. But as a coach, and it comes down to, once again, bringing it out, think about baseball, which is there's so many more intricacies to the baseball movements. There's nothing that's like baseball. You've got to run, you've got to throw, you've got to field, and you've got to pitch, and God forbid, you've got to be able to hit. So, that foundation of movement, it's so broad, I get it. Not every Little League kid is going to go through movement patterns, or coaches may not have the time or expertise to put them through it. But I would say that is the first and foremost thing that kids at a competitive age that are looking, they love the game of baseball, and they want to improve their skill set. I think that's a very big part of the equation.
Yeah, and to your point, and love to get Dr. Gallo you to follow up on this too. When I was used to work with hitters, and Doug, obviously you'd have a gazillion more years of experience working with hitters than I do, but it always seemed like when you started working with a hitter when they were 16, 17 years old, if they didn't have a good movement pattern by then, it is so difficult to try to improve that pattern because it's so hardwired into their system at that point, versus kind of what you're talking about is just being able to teach them to move correctly early on and then have that foundation later on down the road. And I think that's one of the reasons Dr. Gallo, I originally had you on the podcast because I think what you're doing and teaching and emphasizing for kids is kind of exactly what we're talking about. I think it's what's needed.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have this saying, right, where no one walked out of the hospital. So it's one of those things that we have to start looking at how we develop movement from day zero. And a lot of people really don't pay attention to how did we get from laying on the ground, just little pieces of dough, right? 1 million different neurons or nerve cells trying to organize together for us to be able to walk. So what is that developmental process that kind of wires our nervous system to be able to do these athletic movements? And for me, that's always been first and foremost. Before you get to 16 and develop a baseball swing, you have to develop your ability to solve movement problems. And I think we start that from the very young age because at a certain point, we have to get upright within a year. And that developmental process, if we're able to really ingrain that process back into players, they become beasts in the batter's box and on the pitching mound and on defense. I think for now, that's one of the big pieces that I see in the clinic is kids are just, their developmental patterns are, for lack of a better word, they're corrupt. And when you get a hitter at 16 with corrupt movement patterns, it's going to be, you're going to have one heck of a time trying to teach them how to hit a low and outside fastball up and in and to be really robust movers.
Well, I'm going to jump in, Ismael. By the time, if they've got really corrupted movement patterns, by the time they're 16, they're probably not playing baseball.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think so. That's why for me, it's always start them young. You know, everything is determined by how you start and then how you build on that foundation. But you're right, Doug. A lot of these kids, by the time they're 9, when it gets a little bit more competitive and players are actually starting to really flow better, they just kind of get weeded out, lack of a better word. But for me, it's one of those things that it's not as difficult as people think. You know, these patterns are natural to us. So when we go through like a natural pathway, it's a lot easier to ingrain these patterns versus what I see now, right? What I see now is what I call the Henry Ford model. You know, the Henry Ford model is we're training these kids like they're an assembly line. You know, and if we're treating them like they're cars, and at the end of the day, a human being is not a car. We can't just treat them like mechanical moving parts. For me, they're organisms. And the more organisms explore and the more they adapt and the more they're able to go through these movement challenges like Doug mentioned, the more they're able to play on the playground, the more they're able to do baseball flows, the more they're able to really to challenge their nervous system to solve these challenging problems, the more that robust they're going to be on the baseball field, the better players they're going to be. It's almost, for me, it's not even a question anymore. I mean, when I first started this, I used to question if this was going to function, you know, teaching kids how to move better, developmental patterns, better movement patterns, better global patterns versus the mechanical model. Now it's not a question. Now for me, the biggest question is, how do I get every kid training this? Because I feel like this is the future of training. And I feel like in the next 5 years, every kid is going to have a movement training. They're going to be on an app. They're going to be doing something to get just robust movers. They're constantly going to be challenging their body to move better. I think we're just tapping into it, which is exciting at the same time.
Yeah, love your app, Dr. Gallo. We'll definitely make sure to put that link in the bio. Doug, a question for you. There's obviously going to be, there's people going to be listening to this, parents listening to this who aren't baseball, you know, they don't have a baseball background. They don't maybe necessarily know what to do with their kid, but they know they want to help their kid out. So what should they be focusing on, like with their kid, with their son or daughter or whoever, when they go to a cage and hit, or like they want to help, but they don't know maybe exactly what to do at a young age?
What age group are we talking about?
Let's talk about just under 12.
Okay. First and foremost, again, look into, you know, trying to get them to move better, you know, get them out there doing other things, you know, movements, you know, the biggest thing, which is going to be kind of strange. I am more concerned about people's throwing patterns than I'm about hitting.
Really?
Absolutely. To throw properly, you're actually ingraining very good movement patterns for hitting. And that's what people don't understand. But once you start understanding that, you realize there are a lot of kids who love the game of baseball, but because of the way they developed, the way their body self-organized around throwing a ball and throwing a ball from point A to point B to dad or mom or their teammate, that's what they do. Okay, that works for me. But as Dr. Gallo said, they're self-organizing. And I've heard people, we've talked about constraints and things like that, let the body evolve. No, sometimes the body needs a little bit of direction, because essentially our bodies will allow us to do X, but we need to be doing Y and Z. And so early on in those development patterns, and you and I have talked about like front side move, things like that, those are prevalent in a body that does not how to actually work side to side, where it works, you know, like right hand thrower will pivot because they're using their front side body to try and get themselves moving. It happens in throwing as well as hitting. Why I look at throwing is eventually people have to realize this game is about playing catch. And if you can't play catch, you're not going to be on the field. No matter how good a hitter you are, you're eventually going to be off the field. But the other thing is, but you take the same elements that take a young child who's not really throwing well. How long are they going to play baseball if they can't throw a ball within, let's say, I guess 3 feet of a target? Their happiness, their joy is going to be continually offended by that, because people are going to go, oh God, they can't play in a game. They make mistakes. And the frustration level can actually weed them out, where they learn to hate the game of baseball because I just can't play it right. I just can't throw right. I just can't hit. And right away, now they're conditioned to deep failure. And failure is something we have to mentally and emotionally really work on as we grow in the game, because it's a strategic element. It is integral to the game. We are going to fail. But the consideration of what failure is can't result in frustration. Otherwise, there's no growth. So when you get frustrated, you can't grow. But those movement patterns, again, we all talk about hitting. Have you ever tried to fix somebody's throwing?
No, I mean, I haven't.
Doc, have you?
Oh, yeah. When I first started, I used to try to make them all throw the same way. And for me, that was a big eye-opener, When I first became a PT, we had a throwing model, right, where everybody's supposed to land basically within a range of motion, where everybody had to do a very similar throwing patterns. We had the famous inverted W that came around, where every pitcher wanted to get up in this like throwing pattern, and pitcher started getting injured, and now we switched it to a different model. But for me, I used to try to get pitchers to move the same way, and then I realized that athleticism is the biggest adjustment they could ever make. If they just remain athletic, those patterns are very adjustable. And for me, that's where it comes right back to the global movement patterns. Those are the same patterns, like I mentioned earlier, is when you're a kid and you're developing these movements from the ground up, those are the patterns you're going to use to throw a baseball. Those are the same patterns. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The patterns for a kid, once they're clean, they're able to self-organize into their most natural patterns when they have clean movement patterns. And that's the biggest thing is I hate to use the same word every time, but I really want to emphasize that we really don't have to teach players how to throw when they move well. But there's always, like Doug said, there's always going to be a little bit of a coaching aspect to it too, because you have things that are not mechanical, right? Like direction, like loading, unloading, like balance, controlling your center of gravity. Those kind of things that are more like movement principles that coaches can always help players with.
Let's go even farther when we look at throwing. And what I look at, the young body obviously goes through phases all the way up into the point that we're, professional athletes, or if, that's the luck of the draw. But there's a lot of kids who aren't connected. Their sequences don't work even close to efficiently, and their movement patterns are corrupted in that manner. So the biggest thing to do is, like I said, getting people to sequence a little bit better. And I know there's a broad range, but once they're outside that range, it's the old, hucking a grenade look, which you see where the body disconnects. I see the top half and the bottom half have a problem. That's why when you talked about the shoulder move, disconnects us, because we're lifting off our base and we're not staying connected. And when you compensate a lot of times because your bottom half's not there to stabilize your support, you provide the strength, you go to that pattern because you lift to throw. And that's why I think it's really important. Like the global movement patterns solve all that if they're used to working and moving and doing things. So they're active using their lower half, where it's coordinating to the top half and all the pieces work together. And then you look at being able to keep, work in this, distinctly differently, like say symmetrically, that the right hand can work without the left hand, that what we call separation per se. If that's not present, again, we start working very asymmetrically, which I think negates any idea of athleticism or coordination.
Yeah, Doug, first of all, I have to definitely give you credit here because I remember this is probably, 5 years ago when the big thing going around was loading the scap, and then it was coiling the back hip and all these different things. And you kind of you stuck to what you believed in, and then didn't jump on the the hot topic train or kind of what everyone else was talking about. And you were 100% right. Where now you don't hear anybody talking about really that stuff anymore because doesn't help hitters, and you were right all along. For hitters who do like what you could consider lunging at the ball or jumping out, I think that's why so many people were obsessed with coiling of the back hip. I still never figured out how to actually really teach that. But how do you go about helping a hitter who struggles with balance and lunging out at the pitcher?
Well, once again, it comes down to, when we think about foundational movement, is understanding that they're going to have to learn to control, the center of mass. And we have to control the center of mass from the backside, from the dominant side. And it's really very real that we have a front side and a back side, and we have the middle. And what we look at, it's you can't miss it, you can't unsee it, is a good mover takes the backside, lands the middle. And that will always be athletic. That's exactly how we throw. But the minute the backside is compromised, the front side will drag, and it can never land the middle because it's dragging it. You can see it completely inactivating the entire backside, where the power, stability, support, all that stuff is. So you get body separation, all these other things. So the biggest key, and I said this to some clients last night, some younger players, is, and I think, and Ismael's seen me work, is just doing basic body moves repeatedly, trying to find how your backside, your back leg, can drive you and land you in the middle. So when you land, you're fairly centered, which is a symmetrical position of body balance that cannot be debated. That's where we're most powerful, strong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No athletic moves comes from asymmetry. But we want to step away with our front side, which drags that. And the minute you step away with the front side, the minute that front foot heads away from the pelvis, it's going to be a drag. The backside has to almost land the front side in kind of a neutral position. And when you watch yourself throw, because I guarantee you, after you get up this, you're going to go out there and feel yourself throw, and you're going to go, dang, I get it. So that's why I said those are really related. So the thing to make that work is consistent practice of just that move. And I told players, I said, you give me 3 months, and if you just make that move and you do nothing else, you don't go to cage and hit a ball, you just make that move. I said, I guarantee you'll be ahead of anybody that's gone in the cage, just hit the ball for 3 months. People are going to look at the result of hitting the ball, but what happens if you're not moving right? If you're moving right, you know idea of what your swing is going to be at that point. You're going to actually be ahead because now you've got a movement pattern that's going to support future growth foundationally. We're talking, it's a vertical ladder all the way up. And as long as you're working here, you're able to adjust. And everybody gets to the point when they're no longer able to grow, that's when the game will pass them by. And it's not that they may not be a good athlete, but if they're not making a good move, particularly as a hitter, if you're a position player, if you don't hit, you don't play. And eventually, if you don't hit, you don't make the team. And you're going to run into that. And you see phenomenal athletes playing in professional baseball all up and down the ladder. And people say, oh, that's a can't miss player. And you go, they never make it. Why? Obviously, there's a lot of mental, emotional, psychological. There's all these other aspects when it gets into that range. So let's not worry about that, but let's look at the, pre-high school, high school, going into college kind of player, because that's where we've got to get the mold. They're ready. By the time they're 12, they're probably starting to separate those who want to play baseball, those who don't. My heart hurts for the ones that don't want to play because maybe they're not playing baseball because they're just not good. They don't think they're good at it. They're watching everybody get better. Parents may not be supportive of it, but they might have been a great baseball player if they moved better. So the key is train the movements, and try to stay tight. When we talk about hitting, today the amount of hitting information out there is wide. And I know people search out social media, internet, everything they can to get information about how do I make hitters better. Our idea is always to make hitters better for the future. Where do you want to go? I don't want to just make you a great 12-year-old hitter. I don't want to make you a good high school hitter. I want you to be level ahead. I want you to grow, follow this game as far as it'll take you. But if we get moving better, and that's why you can see Ismael and I have a pretty good relationship, because it fits into what we've seen over many years of what it takes to, traverse that vertical climb into a higher level of competition. If you swing a bat, if you have a certain movement pattern, swinging a bat, just hit the ball, I will probably guarantee you that it's not going to be one that's going to be effective. Eventually, it's a fatal flaw. So it's boring because we all like to play whack-a-mole. Kids love to hit a ball. But again, it's everything that builds up to that. If you move better and you start getting more consistent, then it comes out. And sometimes the reward is immediate, and sometimes it takes time. I've got players that have hit with me, young players that have hit with me for 4, 5, 6 years. And, their rate of performance varies. But I've seen the ones that you just hang on with, come on, just keep working. And suddenly they blossom. But they're staying within that framework that they have a chance to get there. The people that want an instant fix, it's not out there. You can make instant changes, but to maintain it and keep consistency, it's going to be how you move. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So how can I tell a 8 to 10-year-old or 12-year-old? Try to kind of be close. There are things I'd say I wouldn't want them to do because I know the potential breakdowns, which would make me very unpopular with 199% of baseball. I would take the tee away.
No tee.
No tee. And I understand why we use a tee, but I advise people I'd rather have you taking dry swings in and with an idea of staying in a line. You've heard people talk about hitting out of a phone booth. Modern kids, they don't know what a phone booth looks like. But just kind of giving an idea, a very, kind of broad idea, stay in a line, do this, because I know that the movement patterns to create that outcome, the line, finish high, don't come around the ball, I know that can actually develop something that's going to work in that vertical chain. But unfortunately, I think you and I have talked about what happens with the frontside move on a tee before. It's real. Did you feel that and try it?
Oh, yeah.
And again, once you recognize that, you go, oh, my goodness. And people say, Doug, I see a bunch of guys working off tees. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're going to do what you've known and your perception of what worked for you. But I sit there and say for the 250 major league players that hit off a tee every day, there's, a couple 100,000 players who aren't playing baseball because of their work on the tee. And before everybody shoots you down, blame me, please. But the moves we make on a tee are actually counterproductive to where we want to go on that vertical ladder.
Doug, have I ever told you the Ken Griffey Jr. tee story?
You mean that Griffey tee?
No. Like an actual Ken Griffey Jr. in high school hitting off the tee story.
Far away.
Okay, so the high school I went to, Moeller High School, it's really well known. Ken Griffey Jr. went there. Barry Larkin, a lot of really good players there. And I was talking. I used to help coach out there, and I was talking with the guy who coached Ken Griffey Jr. He's a legend. His name's Mike Cameron. And obviously Ken Griffey Jr.'s dad, Ken Griffey Sr., was part of the Big Red Machine and was really a star in Cincinnati at the time. And so when Ken Griffey Jr. came into high school, there was obviously already a lot of hype about him and a lot of different a lot of different things said about him. This is the next great star, things like that. And so they got into the cage practicing and everyone, all the coaches are watching him hit and they're hitting off the tee, and Mike Cameron said he looked terrible. He was rolling over balls, and all the coaches looked at each other and said, like, this is the guy everyone has deemed like, the next great savior of baseball. And so they were like, whatever. So kind of just forgot about it, and then there was a round of a station of machine. He put the machine on, and he started absolutely destroying baseballs. And so after it was over, they went up to Carefree Jr. and said, like, hey, like, what happened off the tee? And Carefree Jr. said, that's the first time I've ever hit off a tee in my life. He said, my dad never lets me hit off of a tee. And he's never, ever let me hit off of a tee. I thought you would enjoy that story.
I actually do. I do. Are there people that have had success hitting off a tee? For sure. There's a right way to hit off the tee. Well, you have to do things that are a little bit unconventional. If Dr. Gallo doesn't mind, I'd like to talk about some that just recently happened to one of our younger players, high school player. Quite an athlete, powerful athlete. He's a junior in high school. And he recently was at Chase Field in some home run derby they do nationally. And came back, he said, I hit a ball 514 feet. And I kind of had to take okay. And then I realized it's Chase Field. They got Hawkeye, right? And that's a pretty darn good program, right?
Yeah.
But I asked him, I said, where'd the ball go? And he goes, I broke the window on the restaurant. And I've been to Chase. Yeah, I've been to Chase Field. I'm like, yikes, that's legit. Now, in those rounds, they had rounds where they used wooden bat. That was one of the rounds that they used a metal bat, which, it's still 514 feet. So you can imagine this, and he won the home run contest. One kid actually hit the ball 517 feet, but it's still impressive. I happened to see his first at bat of the baseball season, the high school season this year, and I was watching on a Game Changer app, and I was like, what happened? It was just completely different. His first 5 at bats, he struck out, and he looked terrible. And he did hit a home run, and of course he came in a couple of days later. And I loved it because he said to me, yeah, I hit a home run, but it was a bad swing. I got away with it. And this is a 17-year-old. I'm like, oh, he's sharp. So I said, what happened? He said his coach made them hit off tees and started telling him to do things. And I respect his coach because I know this coach puts a lot of time and effort into his players. And I said, you can't do that, man. Your swing is horrible. This is actually a guy, if you look at some of our stuff, he actually hit with Justin Turner this offseason. It was a great opportunity for him to grow and learn. And I was like, you got to stay with what works. So he had to have that conversation with his coach. And luckily his coach was willing to say, okay, you do what you do, because he said no more tee, because he had the whole team working on tees. And he found himself back, and now, he leads the league in about every category because he found himself again. But that points out what I think is one of the biggest drawbacks is when I work with players or, good coaches work player, we're not trying to make them worse.
Yeah.
But there are things that actually have a negative impact. And at an early age, you want to tell kids why they're doing something. Tell a player, this is why we're doing this. This is where we're going. You might not be here yet, but that's where you're going because you know what's going to happen. If you're working more efficiently or as efficiently as you possibly can, you're going to have better success. But you get coaches that kind of railroad kids into movement patterns to doing things that literally either reinforce old movement patterns back into the equation or just throw everything off. And that's why when if you go back to Dr. Gallo, when kids are practicing global movement patterns, they're reigniting good movements. And I do hope, and I cross my fingers, that that's one of the tools that they can use to offset when something goes that throws them off. Have you ever been injured where you couldn't throw?
Yeah.
Or throwing was affected? Well, you went out there, we all would game it up, but we weren't at our best, our body would compensate, so our performance would be affected. So that whole idea of compensation also comes in, because if you're not moving right, you're compensating. So basically, most people, the large degree, even of major league players, have compensations. But they're such outliers that they've developed compensations that allow them to be better. Most of us normal human beings, compensations are, kind of a game killer.
Dr. Gallo, anything you want to add to that?
Well, you know what? I'll jump back to the coiling and then the scap load, because you're right, Patrick. I heard that for years. And I usually just bring it back to regular movement, because that's how we move to do everything, right? Is you always got to look at how we do regular movements and then transition that into like a swing or a pitching motion. When you get out of bed, do you feel like you have to hip coil? No. Right? When you get out of bed, do you feel like you have to scap load to get out of bed? No. Right? You just get up, turn your body, and get up. Do you feel like you have to over-rotate your shoulders to get out of bed? No. Right? It all happens from the middle. It all happens from the glutes. And that's what turns your body. And if you look at hitting, those are the most efficient movements you could actually ingrain in a hitter. Is not the coil, is not the scap load, is to go like, hey, you're just transitioning from here and you're turning your body without having to over-rotate. For me, that is one of the cleanest sequences you can ingrain in a player. Now, when it comes to the tee, I feel like that lets you get away with those kind of patterns. If you look at a hitter on the tee, they're constantly over-coiling and scap loading every single time, because now the challenge is like too easy. And when you provide somebody with a real easy challenge, they're able to do all these movements and still square up the baseball. But if you look at any great hitter, I've seen even on Twitter, right on X, I watch and I look at this hip coil by Ohtani, or look at this hip coil by Judge, and they're not hip coiling. No matter how you say it, you go like, they're not coiling their hip when they're out there actually competing. When Judge hits the ball 454 or 500 feet, he's not coiling. There's no way. I don't see the coil. But my eyes have been trained to look at just normal, efficient movement. I feel like sometimes when your mind refuses to accept something, you're never going to see it. You're always just going to see what you're already biased towards, right? So I think I do believe that those coaches feel like Judge is coiling because they've already kind of not accepted the fact that you don't coil. And there's not much negative movement in the big league swing. But like Doug mentioned, when they do have negative moves, these guys are such freaks that they're able to compensate and still get to the baseball. But I'll tell you this, when those hitters are in sync, when they're killing it, their movements are very efficient and there's not much wasted movement. And for me, getting out of bed and turning and getting up from the ground, those are some of the cleanest sequences you can work on. And that's why we do that so much on the app. It's literally going like, hey, we're going to work on this movement over and over again because this will ingrain a pattern that's going to transfer to pitching, hitting, defense. It's just cool to see that I met someone that actually thinks the same way. And it's one of those that it was almost just a natural partnership.
If I may tout you a little bit, you and I met some years ago. We talked, and I hope you'll appreciate, we were scheduled to meet at 10 and maybe stay till 2. And I didn't know what you had to bring. And there's a plethora of people on social media who have a lot of talk about a lot of things. And I label a lot of them posers. And Doc, if by 10:15 you'd expose yourself, I would have said, hey, we're done, because I don't have time for that, if you'll recall. Patrick, I had a professional player, a college player, and 2 brothers were taken out of school who were 12 and 9. And I had, Dr. Gallo, Ismael, work on them. And we had a great conversation. I watched him work. We actually talked about his experience as a baseball player and the things that got in his way as a hitter, because once you stop hitting, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're a great catch and throw guy, you're probably in trouble from a point of growth. And that's what runs into it. So you realize to be a professional baseball player, you have to be a pretty decent athlete. But what happens on the other side is that your movement pattern doesn't match. And that's, I think, happened to a lot of players. And I think you've seen that too. If you're able to catch and throw at that level, you're a pretty damn good athlete. but that athlete doesn't transfer because of the movement patterns you've imprinted on hitting, like the tee or anything else. So, yeah, I've obviously, we talk as much as we can. We both love the sport. We actually care about these young players. And I don't think your app is a scam. I love it. You know how many I recommend it all the time. I can't force people to do it, but I said this is where I would do first. This should be an important part of what we do. And relative to the cost of hitting, pitching, fielding lessons, it's really not a bad deal at all. It's very inexpensive. I see people throwing hundreds and thousands of dollars away on all sorts of stuff, and I do believe in it. But again, it's understanding kind of the biggest picture, which is you're only as good as how you move.
Doug, one of the things that I did, I would say, steal from you and start emphasizing to hitters when I was working with hitters is I'd heard you say one time, I don't remember if it was on a Zoom call or it was a video you put out or something like that, but how, especially in a cage, you would have guys swing at I don't forget what percentage, if it was 50% or 70% effort most of the time. Could you talk about that and why you found that's beneficial over time? Because what I found when I would tell that to players is they're less likely, going back to the front side move, that front shoulder pointer, they're less likely to do that. They're more likely to move efficiently. And they're not as focused on how hard they're hitting the ball either, which I guess that all goes in tandem. But just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on why you found that's to be beneficial in your experience.
Quick question: when they did, how much better did they hit the ball?
Oh, it wasn't even close. They're barreling up the ball left and right.
Yeah, and that's where we look at, and again, it's efficiency of the movements as the body is actually sequencing closer to a really good system, because body sequences start at the ground and transfer up. That's where we are able to use kinetic chain to take the energy to apply it. So what we try to do is get people used to just moving without that front side move, because the minute you tell somebody hit the ball hard, it doesn't matter, take anybody, they're going to swing and it's going to be a front side move around. They're going to try to get the barrel on the ball and try to put all this force, execute force at a point in time, trying to hit a ball hard, which 100% is going to lead to a front side move. Now, 99% of kids playing baseball and softball are going to be probably front side movers, not only because of how they started hitting or their concept of hitting and the way people tell them to hit, but training too. So when we talked about the tee, once you understand that the fallacy of the front side move, boy, you understand why the tee is just not a great idea. Why do we have a tee? Because there's nobody to throw me a ball.
Yeah.
All right. So I'd rather take dry swings and learn to visualize. But once you understand the body movements, when you watch somebody throw a ball, pardon me, Doc, it's a flow. It truly is a flow. And you can watch a younger player and older player. And once we talked about how do you evaluate South Summit, they're flowing better. You can just see the movement better. I'll digress 1 second, because the 9-year-old that Doc worked on, actually before Doc was done with those two, the 12-year-old and the 9-year-old boy, the dad walked in the cage and asked Doc, hey, how do I do this? What's going on? And it wasn't solicited. And they have become lifelong. I mean, this is 3 or 4 years ago. They still are on that program. And a month later, the dad was laughing because I said, so how's it going? And he said, my kids are moving better. He said, I can watch, I can see. And for me, that 9-year-old is now going to be 13. And his background, his foundation is solid. And I'm seeing him grow out of certain stages, grow into others. But because he's moving right, he's a lot more what I would say coachable from the standpoint of being able to integrate the actions I want him to get. Are they perfect yet? No. We're going to go through, puberty, the hormonal changes, the rites of direction into manhood. And we're going to get more body strength and coordination. But what I want to be sure is that it's top to bottom. So when you actually move right, when you actually kind of articulate the swing properly, it looks like you're not hitting. It looks like you're less effort, but you're flushing the ball because your entire backside is putting everything behind the ball through the line of the pitch and allows me to adjust but drive the ball because my backside is working. And if you go back to throwing, the kids that have frontside moves are hucking grenades, and they can never get to the point that they can actually release a ball and zip it along the line. And I'm not saying they have to throw it 95 miles an hour, but just being able to throw well because the backside is allowing them to do that. The minute the front side gets involved, they're going to be compromised. So the minute you start getting people to slow down and, think 50% or 70%, I can talk to 10 major leaguers and say, what was your percentage use? Oh, that felt like 50%. One guy said, that felt like 90%, but it's all the same. It's relaxed enough that allows them to make the move they need to make and stay behind the ball and drive it. So it's conditional, but as for your experience, the minute you get them to do that, the chances are they're working more efficiently. They are starting to get sequences that are going to be productive for the growth up that vertical chain. Another thing I tell people that they should do is visually, when you're in a game, because we have to train to a game environment, right? Visually in a game, I have railroad tracks. Okay, they're like this. It's 18 inches wide, and it extends from home plate to the pitcher's release point. So that railroad track may not be straight, but it's in here. There's not a lot of deviation, okay, because the mound's only so wide. And depending sidearm, three-quarter, overhand, we're still going to be working in that reference. So what I want hitters to be able to do is be able to maintain stability, particularly the head stability, center of mass, moving into a position in order to affect a swing, but their eyes have to be in this range. And that's how it's going to be in a game. So why would I practice anything but that? Because the minute there's movement, I'm in trouble. I want to give a shout out to a man named Craig Hyatt because he once shared with me a Venn diagram he made for a high school coaches clinic. And it was awesome because he talked about timing, vision, and movement. And the hitter has to be in the middle of that. And he's 100% right because it all starts with movement. If you move right, you land that center of mass, your head is going to go slightly forward, but under control, centered. And we know you're going to see the ball better. Anybody that advocates a negative move doesn't understand vision. And I've said this for many years. When you make that controlled move forward, just like when I throw a ball and where I should hit, I will see the ball better. And if seeing the ball better doesn't help a hitter, I'm not sure what will. Now all you have to integrate is understanding of timing. You put those all together, now we're in a good spot. Moving better, that allows me to see better. And now I understand timing so I can start my move in a point that gives me the opportunity to deliver the effortless swing.
Love that. Dr. Gallo, anything you want to add to that?
Well, for me, I mean, if you think about that 9-year-old and the example he gave, right, is a lot of times we talk about like the player's ability to produce power or the capacity they have to produce power, but we don't talk much about the movement capacity. And I feel like that's one of the biggest missing pieces in player development right now, and youth player development, is that these boys or these kids, right, they look great in lessons, but then they struggle in games. And you go, well, what's the difference, right? Well, guess what? When we're doing lessons, like you don't need that much movement capacity to do well in lessons. But the game is chaotic. The game is unpredictable. The game's going to throw you curveballs, literally throw you curveballs, right? So it's going to be one of those things that requires way more capacity to move and to problem solve than lessons. So for us, it's always just been about, can we develop that movement capacity to the level when they're young? So when they're 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, they're developing all these baseball skills, you know? Another thing I want to add to Doug's thing is that 80% to 90% to like 100% max effort, right? Is for me, that's where we kind of get in trouble with gym patterns or like gym training, you know, because hitting a baseball is not like you lift weights. You know, lifting weights is you got to muscle up. In order to get 200 pounds off the bench or to be able to squat 300 pounds, you got to muscle up, which is not a sequential movement. It's literally just use as many muscles as possible to get this weight up and down.
But
Where in baseball, that pattern, right? How many times did you have to tell hitters like, hey, you're muscling up. Don't muscle up. Relax. Let it flow. You know, let it relax. They're using floating now, right? You got to float, right? We're always talking about relaxing. We're in the gym. We're not really talking about relaxing. We're talking about muscling up. So hitting is not a lift. It's a skill. And for me, skills are sequential. And that's why you got to keep working on these patterns. But you got to also be careful on the neurons that fire together, that wire together, they fire together. And it's connected. You know, your brain cannot tell the difference between a rep you do in the gym and a rep you do swinging. So what happens now is we're getting a lot of that nervous system and that firing. I call it deer in the headlights, you know, where a kid's front shoulder just flies open and they're just kind of yanking at the ball. For me, that's why the flow and the movement and that sequential flow is building that movement capacity to be able to solve these problems on the field.
No, I think beyond just the youth player, Doc, biggest problem I have with high school, college, professional, even big league players is, you know, we all talk about strength training. And I think the evolution of strength training has to be more in athletic fashion because, yeah, it's good to be strong. But there's a point when, like I said, we see particularly people get strong and where young players look at is, you know, the upper body, particularly arms, biceps, shoulders. But we look at when that impinges because first, a lot of tension is when you're lifting weights, right? And we can't hit with tension. We've got to be pretty relaxed in order to have that flow. We have to have some tension, obviously, but we can't muscle up because the minute we muscle up, we don't move right. We actually break sequences that I think we need. But in our head, I've seen players do that. Like, man, I'm going to just muscle up and I'm going to hit, you know, 10 more home runs. And what they wind up doing is now missing pitches that they used to hit because they muscle up and they use the pattern separates that they're not using their body the way it should be used. And there they don't move the same. They're tighter. But it's not just being bigger and tighter. Their sequences have been interrupted. And generally speaking, if we go to torso sequence, we lose the legs, you know? So, yeah, the idea of get stronger for sure. But actually, when you're doing flows, you're building kind of strength in the movement. You're building the beginning of that sequence, I think, that the central nervous system attaches into and suddenly starts going, oh, this is how I move. And I think if they separate less, I haven't seen anybody, you know, obviously you've met Raj with Synapse. I like things that allow us to move and strengthen in more of a sequence than just like a deadlift or, you know, a military press or a leg press. I agree. We should be as strong as we need to be. But I also think that, unfortunately, as kids get older, strength becomes a compensation. Early strength in an athlete is something to be scared of. And when I say early strength, I'm talking between 9 and 15, what I would call the man-child, the kids that just has developed earlier, and they're actually stronger than the average. So they're able to overwhelm the game, and everybody goes, oh, man, look how good they are. But what happens when everybody else starts catching up? So we call it the man-child effect, where they have to be really, you know, they're really good because they're performing, but is performance based on just the fact that they can overwhelm the game at that point in time? What happens when pitching gets better? What happens when the demands go up? What happens when just because they throw 75 miles an hour at 12 or whatever it might be, whatever the number might be, that once they get to high school, well, that's not going to work. And the only way to fix that, again, and Doc will know, I've sent assuredly, anytime I have an early developer, I kind of really push very hard for them to engage with the flow, because I know that's the direction they need to go. That's the best gift I can give them. Not lessons, not sessions. Get that body working athletically rather than using strength as a compensation, because it sinks a lot of them. You probably see that with a lot of your boys playing. You've probably seen a lot of kids that are much bigger than the age group. They're just ahead of the curve, and they look like they're having success because they're able to hit the ball farther, or throw the ball harder. But what happens over time? You and I know what's going to happen when everybody starts catching up. And that's something we have to look at. I see coaches, they have the eye test. They look at a big player like, wow, that's a strong man, or a strong young body or whatever. And they forget that's a child. And, that's not a finished product. In fact, if you suddenly look at that, the man-child, the early developer, as a red flag, saying we need to really focus on something else, that's when you're doing the athlete justice. But if you don't, a lot of them just can't go on. More of them, by far, the grand percentage of them fail by the time they get to, a certain level of competition, because that's all they had. Their bodies just don't work the way they could.
Yeah. And kind of going back to your point earlier, Doug, where you're talking about, obviously we're talking about swinging in the cage and we're going back to the tee and the front side move and all these different things. One of the things that I still see a lot of online is bat speed training, overload, underload training. There's obviously going to be a lot of parents listening to this who obviously look up to people like you from a hitting standpoint. What would be your advice to them on, hey, I want to help my kid get better. I see this bat speed program or this or that. What do you recommend? What have you seen work and then not work when implementing different weighted bats and trying to do bat speed training?
I think everybody that knows me and's been around us know that we're not really a fan of weighted implements, for the reason that basically our body doesn't move the same. The sequences are not the same when we're trying to swing a heavy implement. And I see, in most cases, just about every case, I see more frontside moves. And those are not productive. I think parents have to take a step back and realize the best thing you can do for a young player is be supportive and try to give them the things that will actually be foundational for the future. Not worry so much about our production at the point of being, which is, yeah, it's no fun if your player strikes out every time. I get that. But then look to see what the problem may or may not be. But trying to take a young player, and I'm talking even into high school, and put them into programs trying to create, data points is not going to be productive. I really am not really worried so much about performance at an early age, because again, I'm looking at a vertical ladder. And I know that the movement patterns that are going to work up here need to be developed down here. Doesn't mean that everybody that does that is able to have all of the facets that's required to be a high-level professional player, maybe even college. But parents are subjected to a lot of information. And I always say, train with the implements you're going to be using, train vision, train movement, and start the process of understanding timing. And that's a tough one, but that transition has to be done early. I've talked about whenever we're doing anything in the cage, we're giving a verbal go. So we want, before we make moves, at a certain point, we're saying go. So they have to get used to moving prior to when most people move. Most people are taught, don't do anything till you see the ball released. And that's probably the single biggest flaw that's ever instilled in a player. And because timing is the most important thing we do. So even if you have a really bad, awkward swing, if you're always on time, you're going to have success. And I know he's going to, hopefully he understands this. Hunter Pence had one of the most awkward swings in baseball. Hunter Pence was a strong, extremely strong, competitive individual, really great guy. And his strength for many years was he was always on time, right? But he had these outlier capabilities, outlier mindset that allowed him to get where he needed to be. And like I said, I did have a great opportunity to work with him at the end of, after his career supposedly ended. So I was able to actually kind of learn and see how this all worked for him. But if you're on time, your body can probably work with its system. The minute you're not on time, you're going to panic or rush, and that's going to create frontside moves, and it's going to limit your actual ability to do what you want to do with a baseball bat against a pitcher. But I will also say, when we feel that sense of timing affects us in the infield, affects pitchers, outfield, when we rush, we're going to probably break down. And what we have to do is turn ourselves over to the movements that we have practiced, the movements that we do, and just be aware that if I do that, I'm going to get the best possible result in the condition. So if I'm an infielder and I'm used to my move, then I just follow my move. But if I see a runner get down the line, I suddenly think I've got to throw that ball harder. I really got to throw it. That's when I'm going to throw a ball away. Same thing for a pitcher. I'm going to throw this ball really hard. You're going to probably, human nature is we're going to go to a front side move unless we, go back to our basic training. And so that's where the earlier you can get them understanding that, it's really a positive. But it all comes back down to, if we panic, if we rush, if we have fear, we're going to go into a frontside move. So anything that actually enforces or reinforces a frontside move in anything, I understand that that's not going to be a long-term fix, because that is going to compromise the more efficient sequences of how the body should move in order to, affect the moves that we need to make to be a successful baseball player, both at bat and in the field.
Doug, when you were talking about right there about how you want you would say go, and then you want guys to, I assume, start to make that forward move versus, it's in theory, people would always say, just wait till you see the ball and then start to make your move. When you say go, is that exactly what you're saying? Is you want them to start to make their forward move, and so it becomes a little bit uncomfortable?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Right there. And it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because at an early age, unless we're used to timing, think about that 9 to 12-year-old. When a pitch is delivered, he wants to see that pitch delivered for three reasons. One, is it a ball? Is it a strike? Or is it going to hit me? Those are your three choices, right? It's tough for the mind to go start into a move before it sees anything. But that's what we have to do to understand timing. Once you're there, you understand if that can get built in, that the mind can do that, then that's there for life. But that's never reinforced until much later in people's careers. I've seen high-level professional players that have adapted their system to work, but have compromised the time value, because we always talk about timing. I work in a time frame of a second. People don't realize a tenth of a second is such a fast, you can barely understand that that's a reality. But a tenth of a second matters. And people say, oh my God, and you can feel it. When I'm on time, everything feels easy. Consume a tenth of a second or a fifth of a second, which is a fraction of time, and suddenly everything's off. So getting them used to, go ahead, trust your move, land in a good position. The good thing is, when you're moving like that, you're athletic. If your center of mass is moving right, you're athletic. You actually are going to be able to play dodgeball if you have to. You move more athletically. And when you're static and you're waiting and you're staying back, you don't move very well. You're stuck. Your system is compromised. Whenever you're on the back leg, whenever the back leg goes straight, the player is compromised. I don't care whether it's throwing or hitting. You're compromised. Try to move really quickly from there. You're going to go to the upper body, and the upper body doesn't move the lower half. It's one of those things. So when you think about that and you start integrating the idea of timing, it's getting them kind of used to going and being comfortable with that fraction of time. It's probably about half a second from the pitcher's handbrake to release point. It's generally somewhere between 480 milliseconds to up to 630 milliseconds at the big league level. We always say, let's go with half a second, 500 milliseconds. But that's an important time that allows me to move as well to get to a good position. And once here, I'm not starting my move. I'm actually almost finishing my move. But at this point, then my vision has worked, that I'm able to have better pitch recognition and make better swing decisions because I've utilized that time, that half a second, to be in a physical place, and I've moved properly with balance that allows me now to be the hitter I'm going to need to be at a later rate. Here's the drawback. When you've got kids that are throwing arc pitches, because that's the age group, timing's tough because then the player feels early. So one thing that we work with a lot is pitching or training our hitters to land in their, what we call the 50-50. People call it the launch position, the attack position. Land there, and then we give them a ball to hit, and they hit from that position. And you'll understand comfort zone, because if a hitter lands in that position, is able to trigger, they're moving pretty well. It also can tell you that something's better, because if they have to make a second move to try and hit the ball, they're not making the right trigger move, or the body's not in a good position. But if they can get used to landing early and then seeing something get to them and swinging, that's going to help in time get them to the point that they can make those moves in a game, because you'll hear people say, oh man, I'm really early. The kids that say it's early, it's as you've expected, or anybody that lunges. Why do you feel early when you lunge? Because you're panicking. Your front side is dragging the middle, and your brain doesn't like that. When we're balanced and our head and our brain are balanced, we got happy brain and happy eyes. But the minute we're out of balance a little bit, or we sense a rush, it's going to change our entire focus, and it's panic, because the brain doesn't care about that pitch coming. It's more worried about, hey, we got to get to balance. So if your neck moves, if the fluid in your ear changes, if your ankles move differently, that's the known proprioceptors for balance. And if the balance is off, the brain's worried about rebalancing and protecting the body, counterbalancing. All these other things come into play. So we come back to that elemental, how do you move to maintain center of mass, center of gravity, and be able to be very comfortable when I land in the middle. But if I land on the front, I've got a front side move, and I feel like I'm too early. In my book, you can't be too early.
Well, Doug, a question for you then is, would it make more sense for players out there who are struggling with maybe movement or being out of balance to just, quite frankly, start in that 50-50 position that you talked about and then just swing from there?
The problem is you can, but again, when we actually, what people realize, when we actually make a move, either, relate back to throwing. If I set you into your final throwing position and let you sit there for, I don't know, a couple seconds, do you think you're going to throw the ball as well as you would without it? We still are, the kinematic sequence allows us to get the kinetic energy, because once we land, the minute we land, we've got the ground energy, and that's what we're going to transfer to the end result or the end range. But that's going to dissipate quickly. So if a hitter, or someone throwing lands and just sits there, that energy dissipates. So they're not going to be able to effectively move the ball. If they're going to stay wide, then you may want to work with kind of like the, toe down or toe up, then heel down. But you've got to be careful, because when you do that with your front foot, you immediately shift your energy into your front side. Usually let you land, now you're probably going to reinforce or enforce a front side move. So it's like the old adage of get your foot down early. Mm-hmm. I hate it. Because if you try to get your foot down, if you focus getting your foot down early, I guarantee you're going to make a front side move, which means you're going to transfer energy across. And so it's that delicate balance of, where do we put a young player? So we don't know where a player sits, on their development or their athletic curve. So some players can do one thing, they're not going to be able to do another. But some players are going to be able to adjust later, and some players are going to have a real difficult time with it. And you've probably had some kids that were uber athletic who really couldn't make easily changes to how they were making a move as a hitter. And then you had kids that you might have said, this kid's a little bit behind the athletic curve. And suddenly you say, do something, like, bam, they've got it. So I learned a long time ago, until I see an athlete, I can't make a judgment call. I can see when there's a problem with the way they move. And that's why I absolutely just endorse the heck out of flows, because the sooner you address movement imbalances, literally physical imbalances that you can see, you're probably putting that young player in a better direction. Changing patterns later isn't easy. I mean, and remember my job, I change patterns in people that have been doing something for 25 years. So and again, when you take a major league player, that's an uber athlete. That's really the top of the food chain. And they've got a lot of ability and capabilities that probably are beyond average. But they... Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to follow up there. When you've had players who have made changes and they've transferred to the game and have done really well, was there anything different about that player than maybe a player who tried to make changes and didn't transfer? Like, is there anything from a makeup standpoint? Was there anything from like a work ethic standpoint, or was it just like, because we've all had that before where there's been some guys that's like, man, everything clicks, and then boom, they're just committed to it, and other guys not as much. Like, does anything stick out to you as to why some guys have come in, made the changes, have gone out and played well versus the ones who haven't, that maybe you can't see with your eyes, if that makes sense?
Yeah, because like I said, I work with some of probably the finest athletes that play the game of baseball. And I think one of the deciding factors is failure. Because if, like talked about the good catch and throw guy who's never really hit and he believes he can, what's the matter? So you get them making changes. I think, unfortunately, deep in their psyche, they don't believe in themselves. They know what a struggle it has been to hit. And I can tell you, I mean, how many times I've had a big leaguer tell me, man, this is so simple. Like, it's so simple, you got to keep working on it. But think if you've made it through high school into college baseball and into pro baseball, and and you run into that what we call the block wall. Now it's like, oh, what I've done for all this time isn't working. I need to do something different, but it's tough to break that habit. But once you start failing, it's a rare individual that can actually break free of that. I'm like, yeah, that's where I want to be, without that little voice saying, you're not very good. You're not a good hitter. Because what had they heard? They were great hitters to a certain point. And then suddenly, everything changes. That's what we look at. You look at a great high school hitter. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a great college hitter, or what would be described as a great college hitter. Same thing. If these guys are really good college hitters, well, they're automatically going to be great professional hitters. Not true. Most D1 players fail within the first 2 years. I mean, that's just fact life, and that's D1. Not saying that underscore all the rest of college players, but that usually is the people that people say face the best competition, best athletes, etc. So I think a lot of that is actually ingrained psychologically. That's why I say parents, be supportive. Always be supportive. Don't compare your kid to the man child, or you had a bad game. It's tough. And the biggest, toughest thing to deal with, and I think Ismael is going to agree, are daddy coaches. Because most of the young coaches, or for the youth level coaches, are going to be fathers. And it's tough for us to distance. And I've watched fathers work with their sons and players. And sometimes it's pretty counterproductive. And it's tough to just take a step back. If your child is failing, be supportive. And if they have 10 swings in a row, that's bad. Don't start getting upset that they're not changing. Start looking for a different way to do it, or shut it down. The voice that tells them, hey, make this move, do this, is the same voice that tells them, clean up your room and take out the trash. There's a breakdown. I tell dads this all the time. They say, oh, I've been telling them the same things you're saying. I say, yeah, but I'm a different voice, and I'm a voice that, they look to differently. But the biggest thing is relax. There is no 12-year-old big leaguer, right? Let them enjoy, but try to make it less about parental ideas. I want my kid to be a big leaguer. No. Your first step, hey, let's be able to compete in high school. Keep it simple, and don't panic that your 12-year-old isn't as good as all the other 12-year-olds. Because I think mentally and emotionally, those are big determinants of how we're going to be able to handle failure. And in the sport of baseball, particularly hitting, you've got to kind of be able to understand and have athletic self-esteem to absorb, 0 for 4, to absorb 0 for 21, or a young player to go 0 for 3 strikeouts in the game and not, be miserable. Yeah, nobody's happy when you don't perform, but as long as you're learning, okay, so we try to teach kids to think differently. Instead of getting morose or depressed or sad, all right, you got 1 minute to feel bad, then okay, so what can I do better? What happened? What did I learn? And always know that, that's not the end. You had a bad day. It's okay. Absolutely fine. Right? Move it along. Let's keep working. Start building that ability to basically solve problems, because they're going to solve problems their whole life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And when you've worked with, let's just say, your own kids, for example, like in a cage, how do you go about, like, if you see them something, if they're doing something that isn't right, or you could help fix, how do you go about communicating that to them without coming across as, like, as you said before, like, you're also the dad telling them to clean up their room and do everything like that? How do you go about creating that environment and else, because you want to help them?
Yeah, I think for me, it was different for me. I kind of came into it as, already in a process mode already.
Yeah.
for my son and my daughter. I didn't overcoach at all. I was not heavily involved. I was a first base coach for 2 or 3 months on one travel team. Had nothing to do with decisions, anything like that. I actually wanted them to learn, base running at first and second that they weren't being taught, and kind of ingrained seeds. But the biggest thing was not allowing them to do things wrong. So they're allowed, again, they had a lot of freedom just because they're around, they saw, they grew up in this environment, they heard, by osmosis. So they weren't allowed to kind of do something wrong. I mean, my daughter's actually a coach now, and she texted me last night. She was doing a lesson, and somebody next to her was teaching the players to squash bugs. And she was just horrified. And like, do the best you can, do what you can for your people. Because again, some people say, oh yeah, that's not a good movement pattern. That is a negation. But like I said, hopefully that doesn't cost you a bunch of viewers, me saying that, get rid of the tee and quit squashing bugs, but it is what it is. And if anybody wants to fight that, try to throw a ball, softball or baseball, and squash a bug, and your body's going to say, oh, that's not an athletic movement. So I think the biggest thing in that training is stay soft. Don't expect perfection. Don't overwork your players. I've seen people get in, and I talk to my players. I see kids trying to get better by hitting 100 baseballs, going to the cage and just hitting. Well, you're pretty much done after 10 balls. People's like, what? That backside move we want to create, that leg's going to fatigue because that's an immense, you're using a glute, you're using the biggest muscles in the body. They will fatigue. Once they fatigue, the brain is going to actually recruit other muscles to do the work you think you're doing. And guess what muscles they recruit? Front side. So if you overwork, you're actually you're doing the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. Let them work easy. And, give them an opportunity to work through things themselves. So talk about constraints, okay? Hey, make sure, feel that you're maintaining the line. Your hands are going down the line. You're hitting in this area, whatever. Give them those things to work on rather than fix your leg, fix your knee, do this. Do get them to do 50-50 if you can, but then let them kind of just evolve and just look for the little things rather than try to like pinpoint and, every swing they take, have to come, give them something, give them time, let them evolve, let them fail. Just don't let them do things that, like I said, that are going to compromise those movement capabilities. Anything on that, Doc?
Well, I'll tell you this is, I have a 7-year-old, and I struggle with the same thing every other parent struggles with, right? Is sometimes he's dragging his barrel, sometimes his swing just looks off. And sometimes he looks like a superstar. He looks perfect. His timing is right. And I don't know which kid I'm going to get on game day. So it's hard for me sometimes as a parent too. It's hard to watch your kid fail. I'll be the first one to tell you, it's really hard to sit there and stay quiet when your kid is constantly failing and that he's dropping his barrel and he's swinging up, but you got to understand the process. For me, it's been really hard to just go, this is a process. He's 7. He's 7. Let's go out there and we'll work on it tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll get out there. We'll bash on some more baseballs, give him some tennis balls, give him things to hit with. But for me, it's always just been built around athleticism and global movement patterns and going like, I don't want to get in the way of that natural process of him figuring it out. But at the same time, I want to consistently make sure that I ingrain athletic patterns into him. And also it's hard because we have other coaches and other coaches don't follow the same format sometimes. We get like, hey, Julian, get your elbow up, get your hands up, and I'm like, okay, well, for Julian, that move doesn't really work. He's a different mover than my other son. For Julian, he's a little bit more of a loose mover. So he has more like a Mookie Betts type of swing path. And you go like, okay, you're not as tight as other movers like Miguel Cabrera or someone like that. And you go like, all right, for him, it's going to be different, but it's not for me to choose. I give them the space. I always tell parents, give them the space to learn from their results. That's a big one that we don't give kids the freedom to do, is they're also paying attention. Guess what? When a kid hits a ground ball or they swing and miss, they also processing why they swung and missed at that ball. And sometimes as parents, we have a tendency of jumping in and telling them instant fixes of do this, do that. And we get in the way of that like natural process of learning how to move and learning how to explore hitting, but the funny thing is sometimes we don't do that when they're on the playground. They're doing the monkey bars. You just let them do the monkey bars and go like, hey, figure it out, dude. Figure out how to get to the second one. And I like to go back to the energy part of it. Energy flows. And for me, it's one of those that the more kids can learn to manipulate energy and let energy flow freely, the better baseball players they're going to be. And I feel like right now, sometimes we stop them at certain stop points of a swing, right? Like you mentioned that 50-50, why don't you just start there? And it's one of those that you're going like, well, if you start there, there's an energy flow that builds into that where then you could unleash it. I can't forget the study. There was a study back in the day with George St. Pierre. Remember, he was an MMA guy, great MMA UFC fighter. And they did a study on him, and they found that high-level kickers or high-level athletes are able to go from a relaxed state where they're just everything is nice and chill to a max peak quicker than everybody else. They're very relaxed, boom. And then not only are they able to do that, but they're also able to relax and get back to flowing again and moving. And what I see now is I see a lot of players already starting off tense, very, very tense. And then there's more tension. And then that tension just keeps going. Like there is no boom and then a relaxed moment again, So for me, it's the more athletic my son is, the more I see that type of just relaxed flow. He hits it and then he's just able to kind of relax it and get a nice little follow through. But I feel like when we get too mechanical and when we get in that process of wanting to teach them everything and get in the way of their natural flow, we start to ingrain a lot of just like these very rigid movements. I remember Adrian Beltre used to say, it's a dance, man. You're dancing with the pitcher. Just dance with them, And for me, it never made sense because I was a horrible dancer. So I'd always be like, man, I'm always off beat. So like this dude is like, you got to dance with him. And I'm like, dude, I suck at dancing. I'm not Dominican, So they have this natural like flow and this little movement. And it wasn't until I got into PT school that she was a dance instructor, one of my partners in PT school. And she said, man, if you could turn a double play, you can dance. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, yeah, it's the same. Turn a double play. So I started kind of going through the flow of how I would turn to it. She's like, it's the same movement. She's like, don't overthink it. Just move. And guess what? I learned how to dance salsa. I learned how to dance merengue. I learned how to dance bachata. I learned all those movements because I was able to go like, man, I've just been overthinking dancing. Like when I used to get out there, I just used to overthink every little move, and that'd be very robotic. And that's where it comes down to, like Doug says, that's where it comes down to timing, right? Timing is a dance. And when you're late to the dance, a lot of these kids, they're jumping in mid-dance. Like the pitcher's already dancing, and they're jumping in mid-dance trying to catch up to it. And that's when you run into timing issues. That's when you're running late. And that's why a lot of pitchers what do they do? Quick pitch. So they try to quick pitch you to go like, hey, I'm your dance partner. But guess what? I'm going to sneak it in really quick, and I'm going to change the dance move. But I'll tell you this, the players that move the best, quick pitch doesn't bother them because they're just adjusting and they're adapting and they're already anticipating. So they are just flowing with that pitcher and dancing with them. And I think that's one of the things we don't teach enough is allow them to explore, but also allow them to dance and allow them to flow and let that energy flow and let them learn from themselves as far as how they're able to manipulate energy and get that barrel on the ball.
When you look at parents, obviously the parent as a coach, you've got a responsibility to, 15, 16, probably travel is probably less, but you've got a responsibility to a bunch of players, and obviously your child's out there and you want your child to succeed. You want them all to succeed, but at a point that you got to realize, let's get somewhere, celebrate their failures, their opportunity to learn from it. For the parents in the stands and the dads, everybody means well, they're screaming, shouting. They actually create a confusion because those kids are now processing all things around them. My mom's screaming this, my dad's saying this, my coach wants this, my friends are screaming this. And, it creates what we talk about tension. Tension is also in the mind. In fact, if I'm tense here, my brain's creating that tension. So how do you deal with, how do you keep people relaxed in an environment that automatically, performance anxiety is an issue? But what I tell parents, it's tough for parents to sit back and say, I experienced this with my son. I remember a mom, telling me, well, God, if your son screws up, I'm okay. And, I said, I'm just eager to see what happens the next. If he kicks a ground ball, I'm eager to see what happens the next time, because that's what it's all about. If he strikes out, fine. Let's see what happens the next time. How did he deal with that? But you see parents, and again, if the kid sees a parent, which is terrible, or the coach, and there's a demonstrative, oh my God kind of thing, that chews at that kid's heart and soul. And that affects what their performance and their ability to perform will be. And that builds up that whole, oh God, I failed, right? When they're young, they make it out. A lot of times they cry, right? They're going to grow out of that eventually. But again, if you reinforce understanding, hey, that's a good job. You put the bat on the ball. Good job. That's where it begins. They're okay. But, I guess the biggest thing I've told parents for 25 years, and I live it. And if either of the kids were here, they'd say, oh, yeah. I ask a parent, what's the first thing you say to your child after a game? They come up to you. What's the first thing you say to a child after a game? What would you say to your boy after a game?
For me, it's I love you and I love to see you play. I know, and it's really hard not to nickel and dime them at that point, right? Yeah. Because there's always something where you go like, you should have swung at the ball, you should have done this. But I also realize that these years, they go by really fast. And am I going to spend those quality time of the drive home nickel and diming them? Because that's going to be their inner voice as they grow older. That criticism, it's always going to bring them down versus, hey, you did your best. What do you guys want? Usually for us, it's, what do you guys want to get from the snack bar? Because that's what my dad used to do with me, right? My dad, he would never criticize me. That's one thing I got to give him credit for. Win, lose, or draw, you go, hey, what do you want from the snack bar? You want some nachos and a Coke? And of course, nachos were bomb back then, so I'd always get some nachos and a Coke. Now for my sons, that one of them likes Snickers, the other one likes a snow cone. So we go out there and we get it, and we go get in line, and there's no discussion about how they did. And then on the drive home, it's just same thing. It's, hey, I love to watch you guys play. Good job today. But I'll tell you this, Doug, there have been times when it's challenging, though. I'm not going to lie. There's been times when this guy ran the wrong way or did something that I feel like I got to hit on that point. But there's always a time for that, right? I think sometimes we try to rush the process. Usually I tell them when we go to practice, I just find the right time to go like, hey, is this a learning moment for them? And also, do I have their ear? Because there's a lot of times as a parent, we just don't have their ear. You're like this with them a little bit. That's probably not the best time to drop in some of the learning points that you can. Because at the end of the day, like I do want to pass on all the knowledge that I have from baseball and the things that I learned from. But there's definitely there's time, and it's timing too. It's when do I go ahead and intervene? But a lot of it is just lay back. And this is the thing about baseball, man. Like baseball is such a beautiful game. Like the game itself teaches so many things. The baseball itself teaches so many things. Like the baseball is a great teacher. It doesn't lie. The baseball doesn't lie. It's one of those where I could tell you as a dad or as a coach what you're going to do. But at the end of the day, the baseball is the test. And that's a great teacher for life. That's a great teacher for the game. And it's one of those where as parents, as hard as it is, even for me, you got to really reel yourself in and do some like self-discovery on your own on why are you doing these things to your kid and why are you treating them this way? Where most of the time when we do some as a parent is because we're dealing with it. We can't deal with the failure, right? We can't deal with watching our kid fail. And those are things I struggled with too, where I was like, hold on, is this a me problem or is this a Julian problem? Right. Yeah. And most of the time it came right back to like, this is a me problem. This is a me wanting to look good. This is a me. I'm the doc flows, right? I'm flows doc. So this is a me problem. This is me trying to go like, he's making me look bad. When in reality, it's got nothing to do with me. It's one of those things that it's his process. It's going to be his game. It's going to be his development. And at the end of the day, I can live with that. So as a parent, as hard as it is, you got to really take a deep look inside within yourself. Like, is this beneficial to his development, or is this a me problem that I got to learn to deal with? And a lot of the times, I'll tell you this: when I look in the stands, I think it's a lot of the parents just wanting it more for their kids and getting that way of the process of. We have kids that are hitting that are looking into the stands half of the time. You know, they're either looking at the stands because they're looking at reassurance from their parents, or they're looking for cues, or they're looking for something. When in reality, you know this, Doug, you can't think and be athletic. You know, and we got to get out of the way of interrupting their normal thinking patterns and their normal flow when they're hitting. But it's hard because I've done it. Trust me. With my older son, I was in the stands and I would just scream like, "Get on that bat! Do something! Like, do something different, man!" And my wife would be like, "What happened? I thought you weren't going to say anything." But it is what it is, right? You kind of regroup as a parent, and you go like, "I'm also not going to be a perfect parent. I'm not going to be a perfect coach. Give yourself some grace too." But at the same time, explore yourself, man.
You hit on it, because I tell parents there's only one thing you ever say the minute, what do you want to eat? Where do you want to eat? And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. And understand that if they want to talk about it, let them talk about it. But you realize they were just in a game, good, bad, indifferent, whatever the case be. They're already frogged out. I mean, so that's not the time to go after them either positively or negatively. You know, it's okay. They know when they've done well. Now, if you just let them be, and on that drive home, you know, you're not berating them like you talked about, just you go get something to eat, they've eaten, they're that. If they want to talk about it, that's fine. But you've got the rest of, days to go over things and understand, let them process. But historically, parents can't do that. And there were times when, you did bad, let's go to the cage. No, they've already had enough. Let them, basically let them debrief themselves, let them get to a good place again, and start that process of learning sometime later without pressure. People had said, how do you do that? It's like pretty easy. That's why at games, and whenever I go to game, I'm usually try to get away from the crowd, because I just want to enjoy the aspect of what I see in the game. And, I also know, there's going to be days your kid's going to strike out. There's going to be days they're going to boot a ball. There's going to be days they give up they don't pitch well, whatever the case may be. It's going to happen. They're already feeling it. They really don't need your input to basically stack onto it. And then the thing would be, once they get relaxed, then they'll come to you at their choosing. Because if you keep pounding on that, I would say you're going to lose 75% of those players are going to quit playing baseball. They're going to hate the game, right? And it's tough for coaches not to get overly, but I rail at when I see games played. Now they go out the outfield and the coach talks to them for 30 minutes and relives every play that's made and points out good and bad. And those kids are done. They just played in the game. They just spent 2.5 hours, whatever the case may be. They're mentally down. It's like we talked about, are they even going to be receptive? I've always said, okay, coach makes your notes. That's what you work on later in practice. Hey, Saturday's game, we really did a poor job on relays. Let's work on relays today. And give them an opportunity to actually solve the problem. Say, this happened. What do you think would have worked better? And I know that's tough for a coach because coaches want to say X, Y, Z, but integrate them in the process of seeing how they're thinking, because that gives you an idea as a coach, like, okay, that thought's off a little bit. How do I need to kind of fix that? And know that it takes time. And win or lose, it's a process. Like I said, I've told players, I don't care if they go for 100, as long as they're moving better and I'm seeing the beginning of that foundation, I'm fine with it. And people are like, what? I'm not here for this instant gratification. Oh, good. I'm not going to celebrate you, taking a bad swing and hitting a ball hard by accident. Obviously, you're probably not going to go for 100, but you're going to go through those up and downs. And as well as we talk about failure, you can either understand that we have peaks and valleys, and our only objective is don't worry about being on the peak. It's, I don't want that valley to get too deep, and that's where it's going to be. Release their tension, allow them to release the tension, and let them relax a little bit. And understand once you train them as a child, what the fixes are, they're going to start having a tool pouch that'll work, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. But it's tough for parents to separate that point. And I agree 100%, Doc. It's like kid makes an error. It's like the parent feels that everybody's going to look at them, or they feel betrayed. And no, just enjoy the fact that this goes fast. Enjoy every outcome and know that even the negative outcomes are probably more important than a positive outcome, because we don't learn until we learn under trauma. We learn under pressure. We learn from failure. And do your best to try and equate that they're learning, and hopefully if a parent adopts that mentality, their ability to work with their own child is going to get a little easier. But at a certain point, I've told every parent, at a certain point, you got to let them go. And again, right or wrong, I think that at early age, they have to learn to hear the voice that matters on the field, the coach, because essentially he's their authority figure. And if he's wrong about things, I know how that can be. And I'm sure you've looked at some coaches and kind of went, But they're out there hopefully doing their best. Hopefully they're open. If they talk about their teacher, your child to do something that is wrong, then you just don't allow that, and you can hope that hopefully their development gets to a point that, they're not going to, mess with them. It's like I talked about the high school coach. The player's able to talk to them, said, hey, that doesn't work for me. This has got me all screwed up. I need to do this, this, and this. And it took 2 conversations for the coach to finally say, fine, you do your own thing. Now, the truth is, if that had been a bench player, if that had not been a, standout on the team, I don't know if the coach should be that open. But that bench player who's trying to get better has to hold to his guns and know what he's working towards. Not who he is today, but where he's going. That's like all the little intricacies that come into that game of baseball. And Doc, nothing teaches you more about life and how to survive life than playing baseball, particularly learning how to hit, because you better learn to get past failure or the perception of failure. You can't just quit.
It's good stuff. Well, Doug, Dr. Gallo, I really, really appreciate both of you guys for coming on today. This has been phenomenal. I think there's something in this episode for literally everybody, like coaches, players, parents. I really appreciate it. I think this is awesome. Dr. Gallo, we'll make sure to put the link to your app in the show notes. Doug, we're going to put your ex handle in the show notes too, or in website if people want to go check that out. Anything else you guys want to add or any closing remarks?
Go ahead, Doc. You fire away first.
Well, I'll tell you this. For me, I always go back to my story, right? Think about it this way, Patrick. I went from a high school dropout to getting onto a JUCO, to getting drafted by the Dodgers, to playing 5 minor league baseball seasons. Even as bad as my swing was, I hit 300, career 300 hitter. And then I went back and got my doctorate, and now I'm doing the Flows app. It's one of those for me that if there's not a baseball story, that's a baseball story, right? It's one of the kids I was counted out so many times in my life, and I feel like for me, one of the things that for me was very beneficial was how my dad treated me when I was out there on the baseball field, how he supported me. Another thing was my belief in myself, right? Even when I was a high school dropout, I always felt like I had this belief that I was going to figure it out, that something was going to happen if I just kept working on my swing. I kept working on my defense, that eventually I would get a break. Unfortunately, I was not good at school at the beginning, but I realized that a lot of what I learned in baseball, I was able to transfer it to the classroom after I got done playing, and then I got a doctorate. So it's one of those things that I'm a late bloomer as far as education, but I always tell people is don't count your kids out. That's another thing that I see a lot. It's when you have a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, like they're still processing, they're still growing. They might be the next doctor. Who knows, right? They might be the next lawyer. Don't give up on your kids. And for me, that's always just been the message: is believe in them, trust the process, and enjoy the heck out of it, man. Because this thing we call life goes by very, very quickly.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said, Doc. It's just make sure the kids can stay passionate about something they do. Parents have to be careful. Don't force them into becoming a baseball player because you want them to be a baseball player. Share your love of the game if you can. But, and coaches too. I want every coach from every level to take a step back and understand the lasting impact of our words and actions on a young player or even a young man. And I know just by watching and talking with you, Ismael, that your JUCO coach was an important mentor to you. And does he realize that?
Oh, 100%. He changed my life. I mean, if you go on my ex,
but does he? Have you talked to him since?
No, he actually passed away like 4 or 5 years ago. So okay. Coach Maz, I got him later in his career. He was probably in his 70s when he coached me. But if you follow my ex account, my JUCO coach tweets, people go crazy over it. I think they believe I'm making up half of that stuff. But you're right. He 100% changed my life.
So I went to JUCO too, and I had a coach there who was phenomenal from an impact on my life. And he actually had cancer and it was bad. I met him, went to the hospital, and I told him how much he'd meant to me and what he had done for me, and he downplayed it. I'm like, Ralph, man, seriously, you don't know. To this day, now he was lucky he beat it. He went in remission. Like 15 or 20 years later, it did get him, but to this day, he underestimated the impact of who he was to me, just little things he did, the way he handled things. And I think coaches have to realize, what's going to be the best answer to this problem here? Is it berating this kid, demeaning him, disparaging him, screaming at him? What's going to be the way to get through this kid? And even at a college level, why does a coach get mad? Probably because the team lost, right? And do they take that personally? Teams are going to lose. Teams have to learn, and players have to learn. I say you have to learn how not to lose if possible, but you're going to lose. But the same thing with parents is take it to a different level and take it to a different understanding. And enjoy every second because they do go fast.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Take care, Patrick.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.